I originally tested the Intel Arc B580 on my system with a Ryzen 7900X and 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. I did this because when testing graphic cards, you want to make sure nothing will bottleneck the card to see its full potential. However, as more have tested with the B580, it has been found that it loses significant performance with many CPUs, especially those on the lower end or what can be considered budget options. While this is the case with any GPU, NVIDIA and AMD included, the B580 seems a lot worse with how much performance it loses, but this also depends on the game. The more CPU-dependent the game, the more performance is lost. Not all games take these hits, and it should be noted that these issues arise at 1080p, and that it should be less pronounced at 1440p. Intel themselves marketed the B580 as a 1440p card, and perhaps this was why. I am sure they are aware of this, or maybe not, but there is a good chance that it is fixable. The B580 drivers are still very new, and as the drivers mature, this issue could be sorted out. Heck, it is not even out of the realm of possibilities for the B580 to gain a good deal more performance as this happens. That being said, I do not think you should buy products on how they might perform in the future, but how they perform at the time you buy them. Or take the gamble and support a new growing GPU manufacturer. But it's your money and your gaming experience, so keep that in mind. Either way, it got me thinking. I have a system with a Ryzen 5600. How will my B580 perform in it compared to what I have already seen? And to be honest, even if the B580 did not have these issues, it makes more sense for a $250 MSRP card to be put into a budget system. I do not think many people who buy a B580 would pair it with a $400 CPU, but hey, you never know. Some people just aspire for greatness. Lucky for us, I had just built my Calico PC. And ironically, we will be replacing the RX 580 with the B580. In this build, we have an AliExpress motherboard, a Ryzen 5600, and 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 MHz RAM. Feel free to check out my video on the Calico if you want more information on it and its parts. With the B580 in this system, this is now a more accurate build for this GPU, and how it would be used in most real-world cases. I will still be testing at 1440p, however, since that is how Intel themselves marketed this card and why I bought it. I think if you bought this card and use it only on 1080p, you are doing yourself and the Battle Mage a disservice. That being said, this is my opinion and nothing more. I also say this to explain why I chose to do these tests at 1440p. And besides, there are plenty who are testing this on 1080p already and will most certainly be a lot more thorough than I am. That being said, if enough want it, I will test this system at 1080p, just let me know. We will of course have REBAR on, as it is a requirement for the Intel Arc cards. In some cases, I will be comparing my results against my B580 with a Ryzen 7900X build, but it should be noted that this is not a fair comparison. It's obvious the B580 will not perform as well with a less powerful system versus a higher one. So, while in some cases we will compare the performance of our 7900X B580 combo to our new results, we will also just be seeing how the B580 works with an actual budget system. The video with the Ryzen 7900X pairing is also not even out yet, and that does confuse things. But I felt a need to put this video out as soon as possible, since there are many asking about how the 5600 and B580 perform together. This is not an exhaustive test, but rather just seeing how the B580 handles things, and if it provides a playable experience. While there is no doubt more issues and controversy with the B580's performance at 1080p with this CPU, we will be covering the niche of 1440p gamers. Some may find this interesting either way. Will the B580 still be a worthwhile card and live up to the hype when placed in a real-life scenario build? Join me as we test the Ryzen 5600 and the B580. Please do not let us down, Battle Mage! Oh right, I decided to use the anti-sag bracket that comes with the sparkle version of this card, and it looks plain silly. Just look at it. The anti-sag's main mast almost goes into the top case fan. Simply amazing. If you buy the sparkle card and already have your own anti-sag bracket, The base of the sparkle stand is an S, which is also a magnet, and you can place it on your case anywhere you want. In doing so, you can make any PC into a Superman Sparkle PC. How very, very exciting. Also, the B580 plugged into the power cable very easily this time. I am not sure what the issue was last time I plugged it in, but I guess I can blame my extension cable. For those who did not watch my last B580 video because you are not from the future, plugging in the power cable took the force of 1,000 suns, for whatever reason. Playing World of Warcraft on this system, I already noticed huge drops in performance in the main expansion city and in raids compared to my first tests with the 7900X. Running WoW on medium to high settings, which is 7 out of 10 on WoW's graphical slider, the same as we did for our first B580 test, we lost anywhere from 10 to 20 FPS on average, and sometimes more depending on the situation. And that makes sense since WoW's performance can be heavily CPU reliant. We are also only working with 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is definitely hurting us. I would argue that for most modern gaming, 32 gigabytes is the new standard, but that's a whole other video. On our new budget system, we got around 55 to 60 FPS in the main city, which is around 10 frames less on average than we got for our Ryzen 7900X combo. And in raids, it depends on the particular boss fight or raid size, but we lost around an average of 10 to 15 FPS here, and seemingly even more in some fights. Of course, in raids outside of fights, you can see over 100 FPS, but in fights, we got anywhere from 50 to 80 FPS on average, with some sustained dips below 50. In the open world, you can see anywhere from 90 to 200 plus FPS, but in some event spots, it could go as low as 70. Since running on medium-high settings seemed a bit too much in some raid scenarios, I dropped the settings down to medium, which is 5 out of 10 on the graphics slider. It should be said that I am only sticking to the presets to keep my results consistent, but you can most certainly tweak individual settings to get better performance and looks, but that is up to you and your own judgment. Dropping the settings, we still got around 50 to 80 FPS in raid fights, but usually sat around 60 with less dips in performance. In some fights in smaller-sized raids, we even got well over 100 frames in fights. So it really is a mixed bag. We definitely have worse performance here than the 7900X build, but it should be noted that WoW is not super well optimized. In some of these raids and certain fights, even my 4090 can take huge dips in FPS because the game will not utilize all available resources. For an example, during this testing, in one raid while clearing ads, for the small fight, we dipped as low as 33 FPS, which is horrible. But our GPU utilization was only 30% and our CPU utilization was only 26%. All in all, I do think this is a playable experience. Although it is hard to say, though, how much frames we might be losing with the driver issues the B580 has. To properly test it, we would have to plug a 4060 into both of our builds and see how it compares with its own performance loss. But I do not have a 4060, and unless I got one for insanely cheap, I would not touch that card. Fun fact, while doing these tests, Saya expertly left a calendar on top of the PC, blocking most of its exhaust fans, which added around 10 more Celsius to the CPU and 6 Celsius to the GPU. She did not notice until after she tested both WoW and HELLDIVERS, and had to go back and replay both without blocking the airflow of the PC. Accurate temps are important after all. Without blocking the exhaust, we saw the B580 get a high of 56 Celsius in WoW. And although not important to this video, we saw at highest 50 Celsius for the Ryzen 5600. And oh yes, we need to check one of the most important benchmarks in World of Warcraft. And of course that would be zooming into a rock and watching the FPS go up. Yes, this is what I am talking about. This is the only test we need. You may not like it, but this is peak WoW gameplay. When I let Fortnite Auto set the quality of my settings, it set the game to all epic settings with TSR to legendary. It did this on my other system too, and at the time I thought maybe Fortnite was confused and just setting the graphics to my old GPU that was in the system, but now I know this was not the case. While I appreciate the confidence Fortnite has in the B580, all Epic settings got me a whole 30 to 40 FPS, and I would not recommend it. Putting TSR to medium and keeping settings high did get us better frames, around 50 to 70 FPS, but there was too many frame spikes and drops for gameplay to feel smooth or comfortable. After slowly moving settings down, TSR medium with ultra view distance and all medium settings is where we found the sweet spot. I also had to turn the sliders of global illumination and reflections to their settings that read ambient occlusion and screen space. This was the same settings I ended up with on the higher spec build as well. With these settings, we saw anywhere from 60 to 80 FPS, but usually around 70. I was surprised to see basically the same performance here as the 7900X combo, and honestly, it might have even felt slightly better at times. Perhaps Windows is limiting the 7900X since there have been reports of bugs with the higher-end 7000 series, but whatever the case, I was not impressed with the B580's performance in Fortnite with that higher-end system. I expected a lot more, so it is hard to say if I lost performance here with a lower-end system, or if Windows just really hates the 7900X. Overall, you can play Fortnite comfortably on the B580 and the Ryzen 5600. Oh, right. The temps. The B580 sat around 55 to 56 Celsius, and the CPU ranged from 53 to 57 Celsius, with a high of 61. Running Grand Theft Auto 5 on all the highest settings with MSAA set to ×2, we got excellent performance and FPS. We saw anywhere from 90 frames all the way up to 160, but usually over 100. We would have seen even more FPS if I did not have MSAA on, but for whatever reason GTA was setting the VSync to my capture card and not my monitor. Locked at 60 FPS would not help us test this system, and running GTA without limiting the frames will cause stutters when we start getting over 180 FPS. To stop this from happening while also not being locked to 60 FPS, I turned on MSAA. From my first tests with the B580, I found out this setting can eat FPS. I would say GTA performs very similarly on both of our B580 systems. But GTA is an old game, so it makes sense. Both systems would have zero problems running it and perform similarly. Temperature-wise, we saw a max of 60 Celsius for the GPU, and it usually sat a couple degrees below that. The CPU was around 50, but at highest reached 51 Celsius. You will have no issues throwing on max settings and enjoying committing crimes with the B580 and using this CPU. For Helldivers, we got around 60 to 70 FPS, but usually around 64 on average, with some slight dips below and a few times above 70. For our settings, we played on ultra texture quality, with a mix of high and medium setting sliders. I am going to be honest here. I was expecting a huge performance hit, but we are running the exact same graphical settings as the higher-end system and getting 3 to 5 less FPS on average and more frequent dips under 60. Either way, this remains a playable experience. Does the CPU and RAM even matter here, or is the B580 just carrying in both of these cases? I mean, it's not like the Ryzen 5600 is a bad CPU or anything. Perhaps I am just not giving it enough credit. Or perhaps after seeing how badly the B580 could perform with lower-end CPUs at 1080p, I was just expecting the worst. Whatever the case, the B580 averaged 58 Celsius running Helldivers, unless you block the exhaust fans of the PC, and then you are looking at 66 Celsius. Unblocked exhausts, the CPU ran at 48 to 50 Celsius. For Hitman on all the highest settings, minus ray tracing, and using Intel's adaptive supersampling set to quality, we got an average of 70 plus FPS, with well over 100 frames in some areas and some dips below 70 in others. As I discovered with my original B580 tests, for some reason Hitman looks awful without adaptive supersampling on, so I did not bother testing it here with it being off. The game also looks very good with it on, so it is not an issue. Once again, both systems with the B580 performed very similar. I did not notice any big performance hits going from the 7900X to a 5600. Temp-wise, we saw anywhere from 55 to 60 Celsius for the GPU and 46 to 49 for the CPU, with a single spike to 52 Celsius. Hitman is a fun game, and you will have no issues with playing it on this system. I would have been surprised if this system struggled with Rocket League at all. And of course, it did not. The B580 in this system easily gets over 300 plus FPS with a few dips below 300. Temp-wise, you are looking at 58 to 59 Celsius for the GPU. The CPU sat around 51 and did not move much. I'm not sure if I should keep including Rocket League in these tests. It runs so well on the majority of systems, but it is an esport title, and Sire refuses to play most other ones. Well, like always, there is not much else to say here, so we will go over the idle temps of the GPU and CPU. At idle, the B580 sits around 52 Celsius, and the CPU sits around 32. It kind of goes without saying, but since we are comparing, there is no performance loss here between the 5600 and the 7900X build. The B580 impressed me with its performance in Cyberpunk the first time I tested it with the Ryzen 7900X. And somehow, with a lesser CPU and half the amount of RAM, this GPU continues to impress. With this GPU, you can run on high or ultra settings with no upscaling or frame gen and still get a playable 62 to 71 FPS. Temp-wise, the GPU ranged from 57 to 61 Celsius, and the CPU sat around 51 to 52 Celsius. And how does the performance stack up for the two systems with the B580? Well, take a look. I ran the tests, but it wasn't until I was putting the graphs together that I could really compare just how close the performances still are. At 1440p, the Ryzen 5600 and 16 GB of RAM did not stop the B580 from performing in Cyberpunk. Out of all of our benchmarks, this is the most accurate and definitive measure. Feel free to pause and look for as long as you need to. The first time I ran benchmarks for Battlefield 1, I ran into so many issues, none of which were the fault of the B580. MSI's Afterburns overlay would not display, and thanks to the game itself, the recording was dark and saturated, which was a known issue with the game itself. I blamed EA. Well, I still blame EA. But this time I was prepared. Finding updates to display the overlay in-game and using a capture card to bypass EA's shenanigans, there was no issues testing this game. Right. Sorry, that was just such a headache last time, especially when Sire dies every 10 seconds and it's hard to get a solid feel for how the game performs with the GPU. Well, we still have that issue, but at least we solved the technical mishaps. We can run Battlefield 1 on all its max settings and get over 100 FPS. Depending on the map, we can see upwards of 140 to 200 FPS. I did not test this game the first time I tried out the B580, so I cannot compare it to anything. But honestly, the game performs so well that I don't think it really matters. This is an extremely playable experience. The game runs super well and the game graphics itself look very good. For temperatures, we had the GPU sit around 57 to 59 Celsius, and the CPU sat around 50 to 52, with a random spike of 54 Celsius. Overall, the B580 continues its solid performance across 1440p. To play Indiana Jones, we had to put the overall graphics quality to low. We got set to high graphics to start with, but this gave us around 20 to 40 FPS and many stutters, and I would not recommend it. Even setting to low, it was not great to start with, but I had to restart the game with a new save since the first recording had some issues, and for some reason, the second time through was a good deal smoother with less significant FPS drops. That being said, our FPS on low range between 30 to 60, and we still had occasional stutters when gameplay switched to cutscenes. Temperature-wise, the B580 sat between 57 and 58 Celsius, and the CPU was around 44 to 46 Celsius. With the higher-end B580 and Ryzen 7900X combo, we were able to run on high settings at around 40 to 60 FPS. But this is a very demanding game, so I don't know if I can fully blame the B580 or its drivers for this performance loss. It also does not help we are only playing with 16 gigabytes of RAM in this game, which is most certainly causing stutters in our FPS. Still though, we could play this game on our budget build. It should also be said that this game always has ray tracing on, and you cannot turn it off. So if your GPU cannot do ray tracing, you cannot play this game. How very sad for you. Right, moving on. We ran Spiderman Remastered on its highest settings and with no upscaling. In buildings and cutscenes, we could get anywhere from 100 to 160 FPS, with a few dips below. Swinging around the city, we got anywhere from 76 to 140 frames. This is Saya's first time playing this game, so we have no previous benches to compare performance to. But there was no issues with playing this game on our low-end system. And Saya seemed to have fun. I guess that's kind of important too, I guess. Temperature-wise, the B580 mostly stuck around 58 to 60 Celsius. The CPU mostly sat around 52. I wanted to test this game because at 1080p, it had a lot of performance loss with some CPUs and B580 combos. I cannot comment on if we are losing performance, but even if we are, you will have no issues playing Spider-Man with a B580 and a Ryzen 5600 at 1440p. Okay, Saya, you can tell everyone about the FurMark benchmarks now. I know I am going to regret this. I already know it, but I am going to give you a chance. Okay, good. No silliness this time, just keep it professional. Ready when you are.
FurMark is a very useful test for graphics cards. It will let us see how the B580 performs alongside other GPUs.
Yes, excellent. Keep it up. You got this.
Of course, FurMark was made in the late 1800s as a way to mark early furry pioneers.
Oh, for f***'s sake. Furry pioneers, really, Saya?
That is right. And in order to avoid detection, early furries had to develop technology to hide from FurMark.
I cannot even begin to tell you how wrong that is.
Oh yes, it was very wrong, but those were just the times.
You know what? Go on. Tell us all about the furry pioneers and FurMark.
It was these early technologies that enabled furries to hide. And that's how we get our scores today. The better at hiding, the higher the score.
We had a serious GPU review going here. Why do you do this?
So anyways, these are the scores. Go ahead and note down the GPU that scored the highest. They have the better furry technology, and of course, we'll have higher FurMark scores.
Okay, let's just get through the rest of these scores in silence so you can stop bothering these nice people.
Discrimination is wrong, robot.
Yes, it is. You know what? Why don't you get a snack or something?
Okay.
I am so sorry, everyone. Here are the rest of the FurMark tests. I can assure you they have nothing to do with furries. I don't even know where she comes up with this stuff.
I learned it from you.
What? The f*** you did. I thought you left to go get a snack.
Why do you sound so mean and angry?
I am not mad. I am just disappointed.
Oh no, did you score really low on the FurMark test?
I think I am having a stroke. While we cannot accurately or fully test if the B580 is losing performance with a Ryzen 5600 at 1440p, we were at least able to run it through a gauntlet of games and see how it compared to using a Ryzen 7900X. We also just got to see how it stood on its own. I was worried when I saw the issues with the B580 and CPUs on 1080p. I, like so many others, really wanted to like this card, so it was disheartening to see. So I had to test and see for myself. And while I did not test at 1080p, I still wanted to find out if the card would struggle in a full budget build, since the B580 itself is in fact a budget GPU. And honestly, I am still a huge fan of this card. The Battlemage's 1440p performance, even with a Ryzen 5600 and 16 GB of RAM, still produced a great gaming performance. And I still have hope for Battlemage cards and its future drivers to help 1080p gamers and improve performance overall. If you're gaming at 1440p, I would still very much recommend this GPU. And if you are gaming at 1080p and can afford to, do yourself a favor and upgrade. It is easy to be stubborn, but once you upgrade, you will not be able to go back. You are the 720p gamers of the past, refusing to upgrade to a new era of 1080p gaming. But do what you want. I am not your parent and Saya is not your mom. Thank the creator for that. I know for this video and others, I am not super thorough, and for the most part, I am not trying to be. The cat just plays the game and reports how it felt and what frames and temperatures she saw. Or sometimes just silly errors or issues there was while testing. I think for most people, they are just trying to get an estimate for how well their GPU or CPU performs and what settings they can run. And for this video, that's what I set out to do, to see how well this GPU and CPU could run together, and what FPS we can get, and what settings we need to get them. And I am still new to this and starting out, so my methods and how I test and organize most certainly will evolve over time. As always, I appreciate your feedback or things you would like to see. With that said, all that is left to say is thank you for watching and make sure to like and subscribe. Meow.
Don't just go after the 1080p gamers and then leave. I'm gonna get ripped apart in the comment section. Well, make sure to like and subscribe, I suppose. Thank you for watching, bye bye. Honestly, you can even play at 480p if you want, I don't care. Play Doom on your calculator for all I care. Bye bye. Somebody once told me the world was gonna roll me. I'm not the sharpest tool in the... What was the next word? Oh yeah, shed.